Brilliant. Thank you so much, Nick. So I'm John McMahon. I'm going to talk about digital engines in the new normal. I did some of this yesterday in a session, which was much longer, on the stage, a little bit more concise for those of you that haven't seen this before. So digital engines and the new normal. As I just said, I'm John McMahon and I'm the product director at IEG4. So IEG4 does digital stuff like councils want to be moving towards. So whilst people were staying at home, whilst people were staying alert, the team, like the development, like I think it was James Steele that was just speaking, everybody that's working in dev and technical teams, the lockdown period has been one of the busiest times ever. And that's definitely true for software companies as well, owing to the need to do loads of things whilst everybody's been staying at home and staying alert. I'm going to focus these slides primarily on staying at home. But basically, as a product or a technical person, one of the things that you need to do when you're thinking about service design is try and predict the future. So given a set of circumstances, people having to stay at home, what are the consequences of that, and how might you help organizations like councils be able to design their services or be able to build new things that can help them best in the pandemic, right? So like I said, we're going to primarily look at stay at home as the basis of our circumstance. So as a consequence of staying home, people had, or these are the challenges that were, we could see that were going to be created. So first and foremost, offices closed, the face-to-face channels removed, people not able to come in and hand in physical documents, and just the general minimization of physical documents in general. Lots of businesses going out of business, obviously leading to the need for support from government, and that support having to be delivered by councils, as is often the way, where the government wants to administer something and then they say, okay, councils, you now need to deal with the hard work of actually administering it. So I think, over 300 councils all were basically building some form of a business rates grant application at the same time, or if they were smarter, they were sharing them with other councils, things like that. And obviously having a platform and tools to do that is obviously one of the great things about technology. But obviously if businesses were having trouble, people work for businesses, and people that have lost their jobs or people who are furloughed and don't have as much money as they did have before, their psyche could change, and maybe bills that they would normally pay to the council, like council tax, they might not be so willing to pay them because that's not as important as paying their mortgage or their rent for that matter. And then a sort of tangential challenge or thing to be considered that we realized is that lots of people being locked at home all of the time, particularly those people living in tower blocks, people that live by themselves, is you were going to end up with this circumstance where people were more anxious, people who would have previously never had mental health issues suddenly do because they'd never been isolated from all of their friends and their support network effectively. And I don't know if anybody saw the BBC show last night, which was about carers on the front line, but it really did illustrate how hard it must have been for some families with their, other family members in care homes and not being able to go see them and things. So anyways, these are the 4 challenges that are predicated upon this presentation, and how we came to realize that the challenge for the council was actually so significant. Because if you try and solve just these 4 challenges, there will be more than these, but if you try and solve just these 4 challenges, you have to do it across hundreds of services that councils provide. So if you've got to deal with these challenges across hundreds of services, then the job becomes exponentially difficult. And, councils are providing things like archive loans, archaeological excavations and surveys, council tax stuff that most people would know about, and applying for zoo licenses, youth court procedures. There's just so many things that a council has responsibility for, that when you have to consider the challenges that were posed by lockdown, it just becomes exponentially large and big and unmanageable. So the good news is, as technologists and as service leaders, service designers in councils, the focus should be around trying to take that complexity and find the simplicity from it. So our focus as an organization, and this is not really about IG4 per se, but it is about, you know, what the focus should be in terms of how do you solve a really tricky challenge. So our focus is in solving this challenge of complexity. And that's kind of true for all of product management, to be honest with you. You know, when you want to design a service and you want it to be the best service and everybody to think it's the best, it's about looking at all of the bits that create hurdles and challenges and trying to solve all of them in an elegant way which delights users from a citizen perspective, and automates and does loads of things for council officers, which delights them too. So when you see a really big challenge like this, it's about solving the complexity of it. So if we imagine that these are the 1,000 services, and there are actually 1,000 dots on this screen, if we imagine that there are 1,000 services in a council, very complex, with different dots represented by different departments of a council, the job really of a service designer, or as a person that needs to, you know, chief digital officer that needs to solve this holistically, is to look for simplicity so that the chaos of all of those services becomes more ordered. So it's about trying to find the patterns, the things that are consistent between all of those. Now, people have sought to find order in the chaos of the complexity of local government. And so examples of this are platforms. So, you know, people being able to do things through a common way and a common approach. So an example of that would be gov.uk Notify and gov.uk Pay, and to some but lesser degree, gov.uk Verify. And basically those platforms respectively do sending of notifications, taking payments, and confirming somebody is who they say they are. So those are platforms, but, you know, with the best will in the world, even today, councils don't send all of their notifications through Notify, even though everybody knows that's the right thing to do. So platforms are basically these boxed up things which do a specific function well. Fixing the plumbing is another thing that people have looked to do, which is around the standardization of APIs, and the National Benefits Scheme is pretty much the only group of APIs today that's still really standardized. And the amount of innovation that's happened in that specific area is vast, because there's loads of people that can easily plumb their services into back office systems. But Fix the Plumbing, the hashtag, has basically all been around how can we integrate to these legacy, or in some cases not so old applications, but how can we make sure we integrate them and we can share the ideas about how we do that. And then recipes is kind of related to plumbing in the sense that it's like a common method to do something, and that might involve multiple platforms, but it's a very specific thing. So people have sought to find order with these sorts of terms, and if recipes is like the quantum physics level and platforms are currently the highest level size of the universe kind of physics problem to solve, I'm going to introduce one which is higher than platforms. So this is Big Bang level, quasar sized in its thing. And its goal is basically to try and provide a mechanism that joins all of the elements that have come before. And so that new thing is an engine. So a digital engine is a set of functions which comprises platforms that are interrelated and linked. So it's kind of like a recipe, but across multiple platforms. And that's what a digital engine is, and what I'm primarily going to talk to you about and give you some examples. And as there's nothing better than an example, I'm going to go through one of the many engines that we see that councils require. So as a simple example, this is called the Workflow and Automation Engine, and that's comprised of 4 platforms. So having an API platform, which means you can update lots of back office systems by fixing the plumbing. A payment platform, gov.uk Pay, notification platform, gov.uk Notify, and a case management platform, just a common way of dealing with cases and being able to enable citizens to track them, or rather any stakeholder that's interested in a case being able to access it. So the interlinking of those four pistons, for want of a better analogy, is what an engine would be. So let's look at a use case, an example that everybody does, unless you've lived in the same house your entire life, that is, moving house. So let's look at the interplay between the platforms that create the engine. So the step one, so a person submits an online service saying that they've moved home. And what the engine would then do is it would say, well, I need to update the relevant systems that are required to do that. And I forgot to mention that the toilet was the best thing that I could come up with in terms of the plumbing of back office legacy systems. It's apt, I think. So the API platform is like a middleware or a layer which is able to take data from an online service, whether that's a request through Google, whether it's a request through Amazon Alexa, whether it's an online form, a chat, whatever, it's able to take the data and update the systems that matter. So if I say I'm moving into a new house as a council tenant, and I also want to claim benefits, and I also want a new bin because there's not one at my current house, then it just does all of that stuff. The second thing is I might want to track the progress of that. So if I do want to track the progress and the type of service that I'm requesting befits that, then the engine would know to interlink that to the case management platform. A person, as the card in the bottom left says, a person might need to buy a new bin because the council's policy is you need to buy bins if there aren't any or they're lost or damaged. And so that would happen through gov.uk Pay because it's logical. And then the final thing is you want to tell the person, here's your new bill, here's the details of your new information for whatever other departments that they're connected to. And you would want to send all of them through Notify. It doesn't make sense that there are 20, 30 back office systems in councils all sending notifications to people using different mechanisms with different capabilities and different costs and all of the complexity of contract management that comes with that. And modules that you need to buy for if you want to do something as wild as send content by email. So that's an example of an engine. Hopefully that makes sense, interconnecting platforms to befit the services that you might want to, speak to. I'm going to go through a couple of these engines, mainly to drive the idea home and let some service designers and chief digital officers think about how they might do things in future, but the pandemic, made us think about how we might solve this. So the next one is the query resolution engine. Some of these names are not great, primarily because they have to be so generic. It's unbelievable. So the query resolution engine is basically the means, like a conveyor belt, to answer a question irrespective of the channel in which it comes from. So the channel might be your website because it's just static data. It could be a chat bot. It could be an IVR bot if you knew such a thing could exist. It could be a self-service portal. It could be your dynamic CRM, Salesforce CRM, another CRM. But basically there should be a common consistent engine that provides the means to answer questions. And what I thought would be interesting, just because we're talking about a new normal, would be to look at some statistics. So across all of IG4's customers, we're able to get reports out, and the customers are via Power BI. And so they can get some nice, sexy heat map-like things that you can see here. This one I like because it allows us to see change. So this is across all councils that are using, so over 60 councils that are using IG4 services, and it enables us to see how and when people are interacting with them most. So what we can see is in February, timeline down the right if you haven't noticed, in February we can see that ironically the time when most people access digital services is Monday at 10 o'clock. So people have obviously been thinking, oh, I must remember to do that. Monday morning comes, they do it. Or it could be a benefit claimant asking for help because their landlord's chasing staff, or they've received a bill about something. and they contact them first thing Monday. So when we go to March, we can see that there's not that much of a change. It's just changed from 10 till 11. So obviously not all of March was in lockdown, so that's why we can see it's not changed that much. But what is significant is when we move to April, and we can see, I think, that people have been furloughed and that their time is more their own. Because if we go to April, we can see that Wednesday is now become the main time, and actually Wednesday at midday is now the time in which people mainly contact or do things digitally through the council. So I thought that would be interesting to show so that everybody could see if you don't have these sorts of metrics yourselves. So office is closed, face-to-face channel removed. You still need to be able to answer questions. People, resources that you would typically have been told they need to do something else. So your resource allocation has changed. And so to provide resilience, what we realized is that you would need an engine that is capable of answering any question through any mechanism. And that would be the goal, right? So if you come up with a strategy today, it would be, we want something that is closely, I'm not saying this is the panacea, but it would closely represent this. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the platforms on the left because you'll be able to get this recording, I'm fairly certain. But it's basically, this is a set of platforms that would be required to answer every question that a person might ask in a council. The more important thing for me is the fact that all of those different things are connected in order to provide query resolution mechanisms, answering a question through many different channels. But the same mechanism is used to speak to all of the channels. So OneView in this case is actually like a self-serve portal. Websites would be your CMS, chatbots, IVR bots, smart devices, so Alexa, things like that. And other is a really ominous thing of those legacy CRM kind of systems which still exist. So the point of this is just to give you a bit of an example of a question. So the person wants to know when their next benefit payment is going to be. So on the left-hand side, we've got a citizen account telling them when that's going to be. In the center one, we've got a web chat function where they've said when they want their next payment to be. But the important thing, just because these two visualize things, is that the exact same method and the exact same data, therefore, is used and retrieved to make sure that you are using the same mechanisms to do things. An IVR bot would also do that. And I'm going to go in a little bit more detail of that in a second, so I won't dwell on it now. Websites, one of the things is obviously websites answer questions that is relatively static right now. But one of the next breakthroughs that there's going to be in CMSs is around personalization of the website. So not really a citizen account per se, but a person providing you their email or their text message number, their SMS number, their WhatsApp ID, their Facebook credentials, providing one of them such that they can then personalize the actual website itself. So that if I go to the benefits page, I see all of the benefits stuff in situ personalized to me. And obviously, again, that's using the same mechanism as what would be provided irrespective of the channel. So, like I said, just to go into one of these examples, I'm going to go and look at the IVR bot. And what we mean by that is being able to field or answer questions over the phone. Now, the reason we looked at this specific thing is that with face-to-face closed, face-to-face is typically the more vulnerable or older people. Older is not the right way to say this. People who wouldn't necessarily think or want to access a service digitally, they would typically phone or come in face-to-face. So it was, how do you provide a service which leverages the exact same mechanisms that are already in place to be able to do that? So this is just an example of how you might do it. It just happens to be the way we did it. So a person phones up a number. It uses some IVR stuff, natural language programming, to be able to work out what the person's saying. When it fields the answers, it then uses the API platform to be able to speak to legacy apps to get the answer to the person's question. So example of that, person phones up a number. They are asked for several questions. They are asked for several bits of information. They select an option, and then natural language looks up the answer that's been provided by an API. So in this case, the amount of money that their next payment would be, that the API would say, would be 596.62. Now, if we just said that to a person, that's going to sound terrible. So it uses natural language to convert it into a sentence. So your next payment is £596.62. But the important thing is it's the exact same data, the exact same mechanism that is being leveraged to retrieve the data from the back office. And this is just one question of over 500 questions that get fielded to councils. We know this because we've researched it. And so that was the end of the query resolution engine. I'm now going to do a whistle-stop tour through the transactional services engine, which is basically the ability to capture, apply, request, report, the ability to get data from people. And again, referring back to our challenges, citizens and businesses need support. So Central Bedfordshire was a council that came to us at the end of March. I think it was like the week after lockdown started, maybe the 30th of March or something like that. And what they said is we need the ability to build our own online forms rapidly. And we need it specifically to be able to do these grants at first. We'll then use it for other things. So they got it on a Friday and they went live with their business support grant form on the Monday. And that form was subsequently shared with other councils. And what I thought was interesting, just in terms of understanding like how many online services and forms were getting completed, is this is a map of Central Bedfordshire, but zoomed into the Dunstable area so that the heat map isn't watered down. And what we can see in Dunstable is that last year, so that should have said that this is April 2019 statistics. So at that point, Central Bedfordshire only had like our standard forms for things like benefits and council tax. So really high volume forms, the highest volume in the council, to be honest. However, they wanted the means to build their own forms for any purpose. So they did that. And then this is the heat map for the same time period of April 2020, along the map. And you can see that the numbers of forms that they're getting is much higher, and it's actually much more concentrated in this Dunstable High Street area. Now, the businesses that would be affected most by, being told to lock down would be small businesses that literally couldn't afford to not, be able to, pay their rent and all of that sort of thing. They just don't have the financial means because it's impossible to plan for a pandemic. But what's interesting is, despite the fact that this is a form that they built themselves, this is, massive volumes by comparison to the previous year. And, to put that into perspective, at the end of March, they went live. In April 2020, so the following month, nearly 57% of all the forms they received were actually built by themselves. So they'd went from receiving no forms that they've built themselves to nearly 57%. So obviously, great, example of how councils have been able to respond rapidly if they have the right tools. And, to give you further examples of this, of what councils have done. So we just talked about Central Bedfordshire. They've had a 400% increase. Huntingdonshire Council, they recognised that people were going to struggle to pay their council tax, just like banks gave out mortgage holidays. The council had the foresight to give the same to its residents. And Lambeth, recognising the great stuff that the NHS were doing, is they gave parking exemptions to their key workers, and people could apply for that using an online form that they built. So loads of different examples, great examples of councils doing their bit to make sure things could still happen. The next one is the field operations engine. And this is kind of like the transactions one, but it's more around assessments being able to be done anywhere. So the PWA up in the top right is just for anybody that's a technologist to go look at progressive web apps. because they enable your online forms to be surfaced and dealt with as offline services, should you be wanting to build offline functions. And it's kind of most relevant in the context of social care and health, where assessments need to be done in the home because the person's not well. But housing and planning and parking, building control all have use cases where you would want to do assessments in the field, right? I'm going to look at one example, but it's about saying that, you know, you should be able to do assessments offline, but you should be able to do the same assessments online. So in terms of dealing with the challenge of isolation and mental health, the same exact assessments, because it is an engine, the same assessment should be able to be done through whichever mechanism. And this is an example of the field's operations engine. So you would have a common assessment and needs platform, which is around, these are the things that we would want to assess people for. These are the circumstances that we might identify. These are the services that we provide. So a services directory platform. These are the services that our partners supply. These are the ones that the NHS provides, and being able to link all of those things together to provide a cohesive user experience. And you would leverage your GIS and mapping platform to provide compelling user experiences. So the way that we see it, and I'm not detailing this here, but the way we see it is the same place where you find out what your bin day is, you should be able to get help with your anxiety or loneliness. It shouldn't be hidden. It shouldn't be something which is, oh, we've got this little solution that if you find it on page 1460 on our website, that you can go and do it. It should be discoverable really easily, and that's why we've made a big play about showing it. So person fills out an assessment, it asks them how they're doing, finds out some circumstances, tells them that these are national services that are available, and these are also local services that you can drill in and go and have a look at it. But you need those platforms designed in such a way that it means that you can connect all of the dots. Loosely coupled stuff, making the services better. Now, I'm pretty certain this is the last one that I'm going to go through, and this is the debt management engine. And basically, this goes back to the citizens need support. So where we covered businesses before, this is about citizens needing financial support. So the example we're going to look at is smarter payment arrangements. And this is an example today. It's got 20 pages. And if anybody knows about service design, a form which takes 20 pages can never be good, unless that is genuinely the quickest it could be done. As it happens, in this case, it's not the quickest it could be done. This is not the best design. I'm not going to go into the details of why, because you'll be able to look at these slides later, and I'm running out of time. But this is basically a 20-page online service that doesn't even ask them for their account number, so that you could go find out about their account, find out about their, ability to pay, find out about, whether they've been good at paying in the past, but now are all of a sudden can't because of the, furlough situation, or because they've lost their job. In other words, without knowing everything about them, you can't personalize any of the content. If you can't personalize it, it means the form can't be so smart. And it also means that you can't make the form shorter. And that's the main failing of this online service. So if we have a debt management engine, which is capable of providing an online form, speaking to lots of different systems, identifying who the customer is, then taking payments and telling them whether they can get the arrangement or not, then obviously you're going to be some way there. But the reason for approaching it like this as an engine is that you can then do this for any type of debt. It's not just council tax, it could be for anything. You could join debt so that you could give a single payment plan for somebody. So 20 pages, change to 5 pages. So this is a totally different approach to the design, where the person provides their name and their surname and their account number, and using those details, confirm in real time using the API platform whether the person exists, and then use the identity platform to connect them to the identity of the person. We then use the API platform again to be able to determine what are the debts for this person, so that we can personalize the arrangement page, so that we can then use that data to give them a tailored view of the possible payment arrangement and options. And then the final part of this is using intelligence, because software should not replicate paper-based or the mentality of paper-based design. So one of the things that you would always tend to find in private sector services is the gamification or the use of psychology, human nature, to be able to get the outcome that you want, to convert people, basically. So if we want to be smarter and more compassionate, because there's a lot of people who can't pay, who will go into the category of can't pay rather than won't pay, is if we look at this section on the right, it's basically directly below the middle column, which there just wasn't enough space to show in one slide. But what we can see is the terminology: quickest, cheapest, flexible. So those are all designed to say you can pay it off quickest if you do it this way. Cheapest, which is great for you because it means if you're on a low budget, you can pay this off and you don't have to feel concerned. Flexible is obviously what you want. So the point of this is to use psychology so that the person feels like the council is not dictating, but is permissing. It's using its own policies as a way of saying these are the rules and these are the boundaries, but the customer has the perception that the organization is trying to help them. And if anything's going to maximize recovery, it's going to be people given the perception that they're being helped. So that's lots of different engines or examples of engines. Hundreds of services being able to be connected using common approaches to the design. And if you take this approach of engines, it works across hundreds and thousands of services, not just several. So it's about solving these challenges with these various elements in the new normal. I hope you've enjoyed listening. I hope it's given you some thought for today. I've been John McMahon. I work for IEG4. If you want to find out more, you can go to ieg4.com. Thank you so much. I hope I've been speaking to people, not by